Young Boji is the prince of the Boss Kingdom who is looked down upon and laughed at because he's unable to speak and hear, but even with this disability, Prince Boji remains strong at heart and always has a smile on his face. Even though he was born to giant parents, he ironically remains the smallest to walk the kingdom of Boss, which is the major reason for him being the laughingstock of the entire kingdom. One day, he decides to take a stroll outside the kingdom where he runs into a shadow being named Kage. Kage initially tries to rob the prince, but he soon realizes that he can neither hear nor speak. However, they both are able to establish a means of communication, with Boji watching Kage's mouth movements and Kage simply understanding Boji's mutters. Since he doesn't have any money to give, Kage orders him to take off his expensive clothes and give them to him. Rather than being traumatized by this robbery, Boji has a bright smile on his face as he takes off his clothes just as he was told to. He does this willingly because he considers Kage to be a new friend he has made amidst all the others who only tend to notice his shortcomings. Before he leaves, Kage tells him to come back the next day and bring some more expensive clothes for him, to which Boji agrees. On leaving there, he walks back home through the town square in his underwear, which only causes the commoners to make fun of him and view him as a bigger fool than before. Over the next few days, Boji regularly goes back to visit Kage and willingly gives up his clothes to him every single time. After these regular visitations from Boji, Kage slowly starts to warm up to him, and one may say he now considers him to be a friend. One day after a visitation, Kage decides to follow him back to his kingdom to see what his life is like over there, so he trails Boji and isn't surprised to see that he is being laughed at due to his nudity. He then follows him back to the palace where he runs into the queen, who is really pissed off at the fact that he's tarnishing their family's name by walking around the kingdom without any clothes. Boji is the first prince, which means that he's going to become king someday, but his mother thinks otherwise and says that his junior brother Daida is more fit to be the king because he doesn't have any disabilities and also doesn't act foolishly. Boji now has a sad look on his face while he walks back to his room, but before he gets there, he is stopped by a guard who informs him that the king wants to speak with him. So before he goes to see the king, Boji goes to his room to put some clothes on. Kage continues to follow him and sees him break down into tears because of all the insults and jests being thrown at him. Kage sits in the corner to witness this and starts to feel sorry for him because he knows this is partially his fault. After Boji leaves, Kage attempts to follow him but is immediately stopped by Daida's sword tutor named Bibin. Bibin recognizes Kage to be a member of the Shadow Clan, which used to be a clan known to be made of assassins. He assumes that Kage is here to assassinate a member of the royal family, so he tries to kill him. Kage tries his best to explain that he's not here to kill anyone, but Bibin doesn't believe him, so he throws a dagger at him as a distraction and manages to escape for now. Meanwhile, as Boji goes to visit his father, he expresses his disappointment in Boji's stagnant progress in his training preparations to become a king. As his father continues to talk, he suddenly begins to cough up blood because of a fatal illness he had contracted a while ago. This illness makes the king believe that his death is near, which is why he's so eager to make Boji a fit king as soon as possible. After this has been said, he instructs the kingdom's best swordsmanship tutor named Domas to do his very best to teach Boji how to become a proper swordsman. Later that afternoon, Boji is seen practicing his swordsmanship with Domas, but due to his lack of energy and proper form, the tutor doesn't think he'll ever be good enough. Just then, the second prince, Daida, walks in with his sword and tells Domas that he wants to spar with him. Although Daida is rumored to have defeated the top captain in a sparring match, Domas still thinks Daida is getting a little ahead of himself. Shortly after, the match begins and Domas is very impressed by the raw explosive energy that Daida possesses in combat. He believes that he has the swordsmanship of a true king, so from that moment onwards he looks forward to training him. Although Daida proves to be a worthy opponent, Domas is still able to defeat him by striking his sword away. Daida then falls to the ground and feels frustrated because of his loss. Meanwhile, Boji watches this entire battle and doesn't want to be left out, so he challenges Daida to a duel to show him who's boss. A few minutes later, the news of the two brothers has spread all over the castle, so everyone, including Kage, goes over to watch who will emerge victorious. Everyone who spectates believes that Daida is going to win without even breaking a sweat, all except for a blonde guard who knows his true potential. In the next few moments, the match has begun, so Daida wastes no time to start launching attacks at him, but to everyone's surprise, Boji is easily able to dodge his attack swiftly and strikes him at the top of his head, but the attack is too weak to deal any damage, so it just ends up unraveling one of Daida's hairs. Kage, who initially thought Boji was going to get his butt kicked, watches the battle and is excited to see that Boji is doing pretty well. The story pauses here and we are taken to the past, around the time when Kage's family was wiped out. One day, the kingdom decided to launch an attack on the entire Shadow Clan to put them out of existence. Using their spears, they can kill all of them with the remainder of Kage and his mother. Since they are the only ones left, the two of them manage to escape to an empty field with Kage's mother, dragging him by the arm the entire time. Up to a certain point, his mother can tell that the knights are eventually going to catch up to them, so she sends Kage away on his own, allowing him to make it out of there safe. Shortly after, the knights arrive just as she predicted and end up killing her. Meanwhile, Kage is still running away at top speed, while he has some tears in his eyes because he has been separated from his mother. After this, the soldiers reach Kage, but he is saved by a father and his daughter who hides him in her stuffed animal while the knights arrive. After they leave, the father and daughter let him know that they can't render any more help than this, so they just direct him to a nearby kingdom where they think he would be safer. On reaching the kingdom, things continue to get so hard for him that he has no choice but to steal food from a fruit vendor, but he is caught in the process, so he is beaten up and tossed into the alley like yesterday's garbage. As he sits in the alley awaiting a hunger death, a man comes around the alley and offers him some of his leftovers, which Kage eats up in a matter of seconds. He then takes Kage into his home and treats him as a slave in exchange for some leftover food scraps. Despite this, Kage takes him to be a father figure in his life since he has no one else to look up to. Then one night, the knights burst into the house in search of Kage because the man who took him in had tipped them off his whereabouts in exchange for money. Fortunately for Kage, he is easily able to escape the knights by using the shadows to his advantage. The next day, he knocks the door and is told to get out of there because the man doesn't want to have anything to do with Kage anymore. Later that night, the man is stabbed to death in a bar, which Kage is devastated to discover despite how badly he has been treated. Ever since that day, Kage was thrown into a life of crime, stealing money and items through any avenue he could utilize up until he meets Boji, of course. Back to the present, Boji has just landed a weak blow which frustrates Daida so much that he continues to launch a wide range of aggressive attacks. Boji is easily able to dodge every single one, and then follows each dodge up with a weak blow because he isn't strong enough to swing the sword with that much power. Although he is swiftly dodging the attacks, Domas still considers this fighting style to be somewhat cowardly, so he uses sign language to tell him to stop dodging and fight by exchanging blows. Boji has no choice but to follow these instructions, so since he can't dodge, Daida beats him half to death by striking him repeatedly with his sword. Kage watches this from a distance, and the smile he formerly had on his face fades almost instantly. After it's done, Daida is declared the official winner by Domas, and then he exits the arena. About an hour later, Boji has been bandaged up and is lying in bed with wounds all over his body. Domas sits by the bed and acknowledges that he indeed was very talented when it comes to dodging, but even with that, Domas feels that the next person to rule the kingdom would also need to be able to strike his opponent head-on, which Boji isn't capable of doing. After this is said, Domas leaves the room with an inkling of guilt on his shoulder. Boji is now left alone, and after a little while, he starts to get very frustrated with himself. Despite his medical condition, he gets off the bed and falls to the floor while crawling toward a sword in an attempt to pick it up, but he fails to do so because of how bad his condition is. Then all of a sudden, Kage appears out of nowhere, which surprises him. Boji immediately tries to get to his closet because he thinks Kage has come to get some clothes, but before he can do it, Kage informs him that he isn't going to be taking anything from him anymore. He also goes on to say that he fully supports Boji and believes that he will one day become the best king ever. Boji hears this and starts to shed tears of joy because he has just come across the first person to ever believe in him. A couple hours later, while Boji is asleep, Kage remains under his bed until he notices his mother walking quietly into the room. At first, he thinks that she is here to hurt him even more, but to his surprise, she just uses her magic to heal his wounds, which restores him to his usual self. The next morning, the king dies a natural death, and the entire family is devastated to hear this news. After expressing their emotion, they gather around to hear the details of his will as it's being read. The king's legal attendant reads the will aloud to announce that Boji has been chosen to succeed the throne and become the next king to rule. Daida gets annoyed the moment he hears this because he has always been told that he would be the one to succeed to the throne over Boji. Just then, a giant red demon appears out of the king's mouth to point right in Boji's direction and then lets off an evil laugh, after which he disappears. The pissed-off Daida goes to consult his magic mirror because he didn't end up being the king like it told him. The magic mirror lights up and assumes his face while reassuring Daida that he will end up being the king. The coronation is being held the next day and Boji sits on the throne ready to be sworn in. However, Domas announces Daida to be the new king instead of Boji. This decision was taken by the queen, who decided to overrule the king's will because she didn't think that Boji would become a king. Meanwhile, Kage has been captured by Bebin and placed in an underground dungeon. After a little while, he musters up some courage and decides to cut through his skin to get himself free. However, just as he is about to escape, Bebin stops him and asks him what his motive is. After Kage explains himself, Bebin is surprised to hear that he has some relation with Boji. That same afternoon, Bebin goes over to Boji and tells him that his friend Kage has gone on a long journey, which means that he's never going to see him again. Boji breaks down to tears after hearing this, but he then recalls that Kage promised to stick with him no matter what. This makes Boji suspicious of whether Bebin is telling the truth, so he quickly runs to get an answer. Meanwhile, King Daida stands on top of the castle and orders Bebin to kill the two guards Apis and Sandio who didn't vote for him to become king. Bebin gets this order and has no choice but to execute it, even though he fears that the magic mirror may be clouding Daida's judgment. A little while later, Boji goes underground to meet Bebin's head pet, which happens to be a giant snake named Mitsumata, to find out whether Kage has truly gone. On being asked by Boji, Mitsumata goes on to snitch on Bebin by saying that he has captured Kage and is currently holding him captive. However, Kage is still safe because Bebin assigned him a task and actually sent him on a journey. Bebin follows King Daida's orders and attempts to assassinate the guards who didn't vote for him. However, this doesn't favor him as he gets killed after a little back and forth. On leaving that cave, Boji sits at his window for a while and finally makes up his mind to go on a journey of his own to track Kage down. He goes to ask his mother for permission, but she bluntly tells him no because she doesn't think he's capable. Boji still decides to go against his mother's wishes by packing up his bags to go on his journey. He ties several bedsheets together and uses them as a rope to get himself down. As he is climbing down, his mother walks in on him and is shocked to see this. The queen's bodyguard lifts Boji by pulling the rope, but the rope gets untied and he falls down. Now, due to Boji's weak muscles, he can't hold onto the wall any longer, so he just falls straight to the ground, which his mother sees and gets so worried that she almost jumps out the window along with him. She then goes downstairs and goes beast mode while using her sustenance magic to heal Boji of all his bruises and wounds. After Boji wakes up, she attempts to slap him but isn't able to because she has gone unconscious. Later that night, she wakes up and spends the rest of the night awake thinking about Boji's journey. The next morning, she goes to his room and permits him to go on this journey, but only in the company of the swordsmen Domas and Hokuro, a soldier who understands sign language. That night, King Daida is having a conversation with his magic mirror, who tells him that Prince Boji is a dangerous force who might someday be used to cause chaos within the kingdom, and it's his duty as king to prevent such mayhem from occurring in the future. Because of this, he has issued an order to assassinate his brother Boji as soon as he is spotted. That aside, the judge from the ranking of kings arrives that same night. With the passing of former King Boss, it is believed that he is here to assign a new ranking. The magic mirror advises him to obtain strength from his father's deceased body to get a better ranking, but Daida doesn't support it because he wants to stake his reign on his own potential. Meanwhile, Boji and his guards have begun their journey by traveling through fields day and night in an attempt to make it to the next kingdom. The next day, they arrive at a public market, where Boji gets sidetracked a little too quickly and goes over to watch a 5-star puppet show. After the show, a pickpocket observes as Boji steps up to top the puppet master a huge sum of 1 gold coin, which causes him to trail Boji all around the market. At this time, Hokura is in desperate search of Boji because he fears that something bad might have happened to him ever since he left his sight. After a little while, he is relieved to see Boji peacefully sleeping near a pond. Seeing that he might be exhausted, he lets Boji sleep for a little longer before it's time to leave. Then all of a sudden, Hokuro notices that his bag is missing, so he immediately wakes him up to inquire about it. Boji wakes up and is just as shocked to find out that his bag is missing. The only explanation left over is that it got stolen by the pickpocket who was trailing him. A couple hours later, they leave and Domas scolds Hokuro for letting his guard down and allowing Boji's bag to get stolen, so Hokuro acknowledges his mistake and promises to not let it repeat itself. Then the next day, Boji surprisingly finds the bag lying along the road with all his items intact, which means that it wasn't stolen after all. After this, they arrive at a red city with a gigantic deep hole, which is known as the Gates of Hell. On getting there, Domas instructs Hokuro to step into the city and find them a place to stay while he and Boji go to get a look at the Gates of Hell up close. Shortly after they are at the Gates of Hell, Domas urges Boji to go forward to observe the flames even closer. And then as he's at the perfect distance, Domas pushes him down into the fire. Meanwhile, King Daida is fast asleep but has a dream about his brother eventually becoming stronger than he is. Because of this, Daida immediately wakes up and tells his magic mirror that he wants to assume the power of his father right at that moment. Now, as Prince Boji plummets to his doom down the Gates of Hell, just as he feels all hope is lost, a crossbow from his backpack is launched, which slams him against the wall and out of the range of fire. He gets up and is shocked as to how this happened. so he looks at the bag to see Kage walking straight out of it. Boji then sheds tears of joy because Kage has kept his promise of always wanting to be in his corner. Apparently, Kage has been in Boji's bag this entire time and has been the one saving him from those little problems he encountered along the way. However, Kage also informs Boji that his life is in danger, and there's even an order to have him killed. So to try and prevent this, he tells Boji about a man who lives underneath the gates of hell who is capable of making Boji very strong. After this is said, they both begin their journey to meet this man. As they walk down the hole, they suddenly encounter some lethal green gas, so they hold their breaths and start to make a run for it. But unfortunately, they don't make it in time and both go unconscious. Meanwhile, King Daida is seen going to the basement of the castle so that he would be able to obtain his father's true power. On his way there, he is introduced to King Boss's two loyal servants, who would be helping with the preparations for the ritual. The large French door is now open for Daida to see his father's corpse frozen in a block of ice for the sake of preservation. This measure of preservation was made in the case that the current king ever wished to inherit the king's power. The king's body is then shredded in dark viscous liquid, which is the main ingredient used to prepare the elixir that King Daida is given to drink. But to their surprise, Daida says he's not going to drink it because he still wants to merit it on his own. The magic mirror hears this and attempts to persuade him to drink the holy blood, but Daida still refuses. His rejection causes the two servants to attempt to use force on him, but Daida turns into Bruce Lee for a few seconds and manages to defeat them without breaking a sweat. During this time, Damas thinks that Boji has been killed, so he walks away from the gates of hell with guilt all over his shoulders. Shortly after, Hokuro arrives and asks about the whereabouts of Boji, so Damas tells him what he has done. Hokuro doesn't take this news all that well, so he draws his sword and starts to fight with Damas, but he isn't able to overpower him. As Hokuro lies on the ground, he recalls a valuable memory of Boji, which helps him recover his strength and continue his battle with Damas. During the battle, he cuts Damas' hand half off, but before he can take it any further, Hokuro is knocked unconscious, after which Damas fully slices his hand off. Simultaneously, Kage and Boji are picked up by some men on horses and are brought before a king who recognizes Boji to be King Boss's son. This man on the throne goes by the name of King Desha and also claims to be the one who can make people mighty. Kage hears this and immediately starts to beg him to do it for Boji because he's going to be king someday. King Desha scoffs at this statement because he doesn't believe that Boji, who can neither hear nor speak, is capable of ruling a kingdom, and on top of that, he also doesn't think that Boji is strong enough. Kage still tries to convince him that Boji is strong enough, so after some long talks, King Desha gives in and decides to put Boji to the test against one of their soldiers. If he proves himself worthy, he would be granted the power. Boji gets his wooden sword ready and is told to start things off by striking the knight's armor, but Boji fails to do this because he lacks the raw power to deal any damage. Just as King Desha is about to give up on them, Kage mentions that Boji is good at dodging, so he should use that to evaluate him instead. As expected, Boji is easily able to dodge all the knight's attacks, which shocks both the king and the knights. At the same time, Kage is really happy about this, so he cheers him on while he continues to dodge. After this is done, the king still says that he can't help him simply because he doesn't think of dodging alone to be a valid fighting style, and also because Boji lacks the fundamental attacking ability of fence. Kage tries his best to beg the king, but he still declines, but right before they leave, Kage brings out a recommendation letter that was issued to Boji a while ago. King Desha reads this letter for a few seconds, and then rips it to pieces while asking the guards to throw them out of there. Right before they leave, one of the guards draws their attention to say that the man they were looking for isn't King Desha, but rather his younger brother named Despa, who is known to have the ability to make people powerful. After the knight says this, he hands Kage the recommendation letter that was torn up because he feels that it might come in handy. Amidst all this, Kage is confused as to why the guard is going out of his way to tell them all this, so he tells them that he's doing it because he wants to see how Prince Boji grows and also because he feels pity for them. Now at the castle, Apis walks into the basement where the ritual is being held and takes a cold stare at King Daida, who is very shocked to see him. Daida recalls that he sent Bebin to kill him before, so the fact that Apis is still alive could only mean that Bebin has been killed. Apis dashes toward Daida with murderous intent, and right before he can kill Daida, he hears a familiar voice that orders him to stop coming from the magic mirror. The one in the mirror happens to be a lady named Miranjo, who is someone that Apis was introduced to by King Boss a long time ago, and has sworn his allegiance to. Apis kneels before her and explains that he has attempted to kill King Daida because it was the will of King Boss to make Boji the king. Miranjo tells him to forget about that and now focus on making Daida the king instead, after which she fills him in on the details of her plan. Now as Empis is bent over, Dayuta tries to kill him, but Miranjo begs him not to because he is now on their side, so after hearing this, Dayuta drops the weapon. Then all of a sudden, Apis swiftly gets up and punches Dayuta right in the stomach, which causes him to go unconscious. Now while he is unconscious, they take him back to the ritual room to mop up the holy blood back into the chalice and give it to him to drink. Apis's facial expression indicates that he isn't on board with this idea, but he has no choice but to follow through with it. In the interim, Kage and Boji are finally able to locate Despa's house. He knocks on the door and it is opened by Despa himself, who is a blonde man with very nice eyelashes. Despa goes down on one knee and reads the recommendation letter to discover that Boji is actually King Boss's son. Also, the fact that Bebin has given him a recommendation letter could only mean that he has considerable talent. But before Despa even considers taking Boji in for training, he stretches his palm out and demands some sort of payment, which Kage is already prepared for since Bebin already gave him some money to pay him. Despa takes a look at the money in the bag and says that it's not enough, so Kage has to offer his life savings to make it up, which is just some treasure he stole while he was at the castle. After the payment has been made, Despa takes them into his house and gives them a warm welcome, while telling them to sit down so he would be able to give a judgment on Boji. Despa is capable of seeing things that a regular person can't, so he holds his hands and uses his ability to judge that Boji has no physical strength at all, which leads him to the conclusion that no matter how hard Boji is to train, he would never be able to get stronger. This statement breaks his heart, so he gets up and walks towards the door because he is ready to give up. Right before he reaches the door, Despa appears in front of him and says that he still wishes to train him because he can sense that he has some untapped potential. So with that, their training is expected to start tomorrow. The following morning, Boji is subjected to train by doing simple house chores in an attempt to build his strength. Then one day after Despa tastes a meal that Boji has prepared, it is revealed that Boji is the child of a giant, which he finds to be quite strange because giants are usually very large and very strong too, which is pure opposite of what Boji is. Apparently, the stomachs of giants are frightfully sturdy and most poisons have no effect on them, which means that Boji is not allowed to cook any food for them or else they may get poisoned. At this point, Despa feels that Boji is ready, so he takes him to the weapon arsenal to select the weapon that will be perfect for him. Despa vows to teach him all the related skills and techniques to make him an invincible opponent. After that day, Boji takes his chores, studies, and training very seriously, up until the point that Despa gets impressed because he has started to do them on his own without anyone having to tell him. Then one day while Kage is sweeping the porch, he hears a loud noise coming from the training room, so he runs over there to find out what has happened. He knocks on the door, and once it is opened, Kage is surprised to see Boji standing in front of a giant boulder that has been split in two. At this point in the story, it is revealed that before Boss became a king, Lady Miranjo introduced him to a demon who granted him great power in exchange for the shortening of his life. Another condition given was that this power would only be unlocked at the moment he gives birth to a child. Having received these instructions, the boss calls the strongest woman in the world and asks her to bear his child. So a couple months later, while Boss is on the brink of death in a war, he suddenly gets a strong burst of strength, which indicates that his child has just been born. With this newfound strength, he is easily able to subdue his enemies with his weapon. After this is done, he goes over to see Boji, his newborn baby who is very tiny, which is ironic because he is the child of two giants. Back in the present time, the ritual that was performed on Dayuta has caused Boss to come back to life and take over his body. As Boss now sits on his throne, he goes on to ask Miranjo, who is currently the strongest person in the world. He is surprised that it isn't him, but rather Boji. Boss sees this and smirks while saying he finds this rather interesting, and after this, Miranjo suggests that it would be best if his wife, Queen Healing, is to be killed. Meanwhile, Hokuro has returned to the castle because at this point he thinks that Boji is dead, so he has come to break the news to Queen Healing. The night before getting there, Damas had warned him not to do this because the queen would most likely kill him for letting this happen, but Hokuro just proved stubborn and said that he must report back to the royal family. Just as Domus has predicted, the queen hears this and decides to have Hokuro executed. So the next morning, Hokuro was tied up and gathered by a large set of guards who were ready to execute him. But despite having warned him about this the previous night, Damas has still come there to save him, so he puts his hood up and dashes into action. He can use his weapon to attack the knights and provide a chance to grab Hokuro, but his plan of escape is cut short as King Boss appears right in front of him. Domas can tell that this isn't Dayuta anymore because there is something unusual in his aura. They both start to battle, but Boss is easily able to overpower him, after which he takes the mask off and Domus's identity is revealed. Boss then informs them all that Boji isn't dead, but rather is undergoing intense training in the underworld. However, King Boss makes the decision not to have Domus executed, so he goes closer to him and assigns him a task as he whispers into his ear. Since it's now common knowledge that Boji is training in the underworld, Boss has given Domus the instruction to destroy it. Since Domus has lost his hand, he has asked Hokuro to accompany him and also states that he will teach him the art of swordsmanship, so they both will be put to an advantage. Now in the underworld, Kage is busy sweeping the front lawn, but just then, Despa comes out of training with Boji to announce that Boji has fully mastered the Despa arts. Concurrently, King Boss reveals to Queen Healing that he has overtaken Daida's body without knowledge of what has happened to him. At first, she doesn't believe it, but once Boss can prove it to her, she faints because she finds it to be unbelievable. Later that night, Queen Healing is seen having a bad dream about her son Daida. At the same time, King Boss has arranged for 3 lion monsters to kill Healing, so they start to approach her bedroom at midnight to finish the job. Healing's bodyguard named Dorshe watches over her in her sleep. He senses that danger is approaching, so he goes into the hallway to see the 3 lion monsters who are here to assassinate her. Before leaving, he instructs the maid to not let Healing leave that room under any circumstances because he knows that this battle is about to get very rough. Shortly after, the battle begins and Dorshe can fully hold his ground against lions, which gives a little sense of just how strong he truly is. At a certain point, the lions manage to land a successful blow by scratching him, but fortunately for Dorshe, this doesn't seem to take any effect because he has a suit of armor already prepared under him. In the final stages, Dorshe decides to get serious, so he goes Super Saiyan and starts to deal damage much more intense than before. However, his adrenaline rush is cut short when he gets stabbed by the lions, which causes him to bleed out massive amounts of blood, but despite that, he is still able to use his last bit of strength to land the finishing blows on the monsters. A couple of hours later, he wakes up in bed with the queen acting as his caretaker. Once she sees that Dorshe has woken up, she thanks him deeply for protecting her last night, after which she lets him know that she is going to attack King Boss directly because she believes that this was an assassination order placed by him. Meanwhile, the real Daida finds himself in a dark, empty abyss that seems to have no end. As he continues to walk for hours, he begins to wonder whether he is going to be stuck in this darkness forever. The next morning, Queen Healing goes right before the king to confront him on what has led him to possess Daida's body. King Boss doesn't answer this question directly and just lets her know that it's a matter of utmost importance. Healing isn't satisfied by that answer, so she starts to yell at King Boss at the top of her lungs. During this time, Daida can hear it and recognizes it to be his mother's voice, so he starts to call out her name in an attempt to draw her attention. Surprisingly, Queen Healing can hear his cries and traces them to come from King Boss's chest, so she draws her dagger and attempts to cut him out because she thinks that would be the solution. However, Dorshe stops her just in time and knocks her unconscious because he knows that stabbing him also affects Daida's body, so if she had stabbed him, he would have been gone forever. After this, King Boss orders Dorshe to get the queen out of the country because he knows that her life is in danger. Back in the underworld house, Despa has announced that Boji has completed his training and has fully mastered the arts. As Kage remains surprised to hear this, he notices that he now has a wide sword attached to his waist. However, Boji unveils the sword and Kage is disappointed to see that it's a very thin and puny sword. Despa urges Kage not to doubt him and also reassures him that Boji is now a master of the arts even with that tiny sword. About an hour later, the 3 of them go to the local bar, get a couple of drinks to celebrate Boji's milestone. Then as they sit to enjoy their drinks, 3 reptilian goons come out of nowhere to their table and start to throw insults at Boji and Despa. At a certain point, Despa can't bear the insults anymore, so he gets up and launches an attack on one of them, but after that, he gets beat up badly because he isn't as strong as he advertised. Boji steps into the fight and knocks the opponent over with his powerless punches, which surprises Kage. Despa then hands him his sword, which he uses to make the opponent unconscious with a single strike. After this is done, Kage is confused as to how Boji has done all this, so he sticks a pin in his palm to explain. Surprisingly, the pin in his hand doesn't cause any pain because it hasn't hit a pain receptor, which is the same method Boji can use to knock out his opponents. During the battle, Boji uses his needle-like sword to directly stimulate the nerves while avoiding damaging any vital organs. So put simply, Boji can completely defeat his opponent without dealing any permanent damage. However, he is capable of taking the life of his opponent at any time. As they walk back home, Despa sneaks away from them both and goes over to meet the same reptilian goons who had come to attack them. Apparently, Despa had hired them just so that he would be able to see Boji in a real fight. After they receive payment from Despa, the guy who faced Boji remarks that he could sense Boji's aura, which was so strong that he knew he was going to lose at the moment he picked the sword up. Then as they both continue their journey home, Kage starts to wonder who had trained Boji to get fast enough to dodge so easily and quickly. Boji hears this and starts to explain that while he was younger, Bebin's giant serpent secretly trained him every single day to improve his speed by throwing rocks at him. So with this newly acquired skill learned from Despa, they both think it's about time they return to the kingdom. Daida remains in the darkness and starts to understand that this is how Boji has been living his life this entire time. Back when he was little, they used to play together, but as he got bigger, he was one day told by his mother that Boji was a weakling who couldn't do anything for himself, so he was given the responsibility of becoming stronger so he could be able to protect him. A couple of years later, he was gifted with a magic mirror, which initially offered him sound advice and gave him lots of praise, which eventually clouded his judgment, and just like that, he started to look down on his brother Boji. As Daida remains in the abyss, he spots a child sitting at the other end, so he rushes over there and sees that she is crying. He tries his best to comfort her while saying he will do his best to get them both out of there. Just then, a group of eyeless people appear behind Daida and start to throw insults at the little girl and claim that she is the one who has killed them all. The little girl gets so traumatized by this that she starts to run away, but after she runs for a few seconds, she falls to the ground, which causes her mask to fall off. Daida takes a look at her face and is frightened because all the skin on it has been peeled off. He then looks down and sees her hands have also been chopped off. Although he is initially frightened by this, he later decides to fight off the people who are traumatizing her, and after this is done, she introduces herself to him as Miranjo. So with this, Daida promises to stick with little Miranjo and also to get them both out of there. During the same time, King Desha visits a prison cell to check on one of his most notorious criminals, but to his surprise, the prison cell is found to be empty. He gets a faint scent of death coming from this room, so he knows it's not the guard's fault. Rather, he reasons that someone from the outside is orchestrating it, which is a man named Oken, who is known to be the Sword King of the Underworld and is capable to use a variety of sword techniques. Shortly after, King Desha discovers that the escaped criminals have entered the kingdom of Boss, so he lines up his soldiers and tells them that they plan to take advantage of the confusion and steal the kingdom of Boss. Kage and Boji are now bidding Despa farewell as they are about to start their journey back to the kingdom, but before they are even able to leave, a group of soldiers arrive and wish to carry Boji along because of the criminals that have overridden the kingdom from the underworld. This is the precise moment that Boji has been waiting for, so he doesn't hesitate to take the soldiers' hand and joins them on their journey to the kingdom. At the same time, Queen Healing and a couple of her soldiers are returning to the castle by horse, and on getting there, they are informed that King Boss has now been taken hostage by criminals. Queen Healing hears this and immediately rushes over there while she's being washed over by Miranjo. While Boji and the others approach the kingdom, the soldiers reveal that the criminals' objective is most likely to overthrow the kingdom or perhaps take control of it. This statement from the soldiers reminds Kage of some important information that he has yet to tell Boji. According to the captain, there is someone who has brought those criminals from the underworld into the kingdom, and during a flashback, Miranjo is revealed to be that person. On that day, after she frees them from their cells, the criminals are curious as to what the purpose of it is, but Miranjo just tells them that they are free to do whatever they desire, be it attacking the town or taking over the entire kingdom. With this being said, they are still confused because they don't understand what she stands to gain by doing all of this. These criminals individually go by the names Zaku, Gaigen, Kimbo, Oken, Black, and Red. Then, as they were peacefully escorted out, Black and Red come out of nowhere and instantly kill the two escorts. Apis readies his weapon, and right before they both start to battle, Zaku comes in the middle and begs his comrades not to fight against Miranjo's side because they may just end up being stuck in the Mystic Hall forever. His comrades see the logic to this, so they decide to put their weapons down and follow Apis so they can be led to the kingdom. Shortly after, they arrive at the kingdom and have tied King Boss up with ropes while Miranjo observes this from a distance, after which Boss is thrown on the floor and then ordered to be thrown into the dungeon. Before leaving, Kimbo takes his crown and goes over to sit on the throne because he wants to become the new king. Oken doesn't support Kimbo being the new king, so he walks over to him in an attempt to take him out. Zaku sees this and doesn't think he'll be able to win against Kimbo. However, he feels that if Oken can weaken him a bit, he will be able to finish him off. To everyone's surprise, Oken stands before Kimbo and starts to tremble in fear, and after that, he turns his back and walks away, which makes everyone from that moment on to see him as a weakling. Following this, Miranjo orders them all to follow her to the castle gate, so after the rest are gone, Oken turns back to Kimbo and dashes towards him. Before they both can collide, Oken uses his magic to freeze Kimbo in place while he stabs him to death several times. Zaku observes this feat and realizes that Oken has just been hiding his true capabilities from the others all along. As Kimbo lies dead on the floor, he allows Zaku to pick up the crown and assume the role of king. Then a little while after, Kimbo's dead body is thrown into the forest. At the castle front, Dorche and some other knights see Apis holding a mirror, so they naturally start to assume that he is the one behind everything. But just then, Miranjo speaks up and tells them that she is rather the one responsible. Dorche hears her voice and remains in disbelief because he vividly remembers her dying in the last war she fought in. That aside, Dorche goes on to ask her why she's doing all of this, so Lady Miranjo makes it clear that she wants to bring this entire kingdom to ruin. Now that Miranjo's wishes have been made clear, she sends an entire army of lion monsters to kill Dorche and the others. However, they are easily able to defeat the first round of monsters, which makes him think that this is going to be a walk in the park. But a female knight named Anne calls him out and explains that they sent those monsters simply to measure the reach of their weapons. Then in the next few seconds, about 5 of these lion beasts pounce on Dorche at once, causing him to be caught underneath the awl, but he is instantly able to free himself thanks to the metal implants he got in his back and heels. Lady Miranjo is quite impressed by this, but she still believes that no matter how hard they fight, they still won't be able to escape death. She sends the criminals Black and Red to join the battle, who ask her to call off the lion beasts because they believe they can take them all on their own. So with this being said, she calls them off and then orders them to go after Queen Healing instead, but Dorche is still able to handle both the criminals and the lions. With the situation getting worse, Dorche blows a hand whistle, which signals the horse to get the queen out of there, but before she can escape, she is stopped by Oaken, the demon. On getting there, he immediately uses his sword to cut her hand, but this isn't an issue for her since she can heal it with magic. Anne arrives just in time and uses her kunai to pierce Oaken in the eyes and mouth. Just as she thinks that Oaken has been killed, he quickly heals himself and then goes on to slit Anne's throat. This causes healing to snap, so she uses her holy light blinding technique to scare Oaken off, after which she heals Anne's throat with some magic. Although Oaken has been chased away, things aren't looking too good for them because Dorche has been hit with a fatal blow by Giga and the rest of the soldiers are unconscious. To make matters worse, another group of lion beasts has surrounded the queen, but right before they can eat her, a spear is thrown out of nowhere, which kills the first group. This help unexpectedly comes from Apis because he can't just stand to let the queen die, so after this he gives her a signal to get the hell out of there. Apis then calls Dorche's name out, which can wake him up and also give him an adrenaline rush that he uses to bruise and batter the remainder of the lion beasts with his bare hands. At the same time, Oaken has now made his way to the civilian area, which ends up throwing the entire place into chaos with citizens running for their dear lives. At this point in the story, it is revealed that Lady Miranjo was the one who begged King Boss to have another child because she believed that it would help him prolong his lifetime. At the time, King Boss wasn't on board with this idea because he knew that a giant woman could give a birth only to one child. Miranjo herself is aware of this, which is why she has already arranged for Healing to be the new queen. So as time went on, King Boss's second child came about to be Daida. Back in the civilian area, the area's soldiers try their best to thwart Oaken, but their efforts prove to be in vain because they all end up getting wiped out. Fortunately for them, Boji and the others arrive at the scene shortly after, which gives the soldiers some hope of Oaken being stopped. However, before the battle begins, the captain recalls that Prince Despa had told him not to battle Oaken until he gets there because he is no match for him. After this, Despa also informs him that Oaken is Boji's natural enemy, so he is instructed not to allow Boji face off against him under any circumstances. At this point, Despa is nowhere to be found, so the captain realizes that he has to take matters into his own hands and face off against Oaken even if he doesn't have that much hope and success. So to get Boji out of the way, he tells him and Kage to go to the palace and do their best to save the queen. During this time, Dorche gets his left leg bitten off while he's trying to protect the queen. However, it also seems to give him an adrenaline boost which helps him fight the lion monsters for a little longer. It doesn't take too long before the monsters can overwhelm him, so as he senses that the end is near, he urges the queen to get out of there to ensure her safety. Just then, Bebin's giant snake emerges from the ground and launches an attack on the lions, which frees him from their grip. The snake then tells the queen not to be afraid of him because he is the little snake that she had saved a long time ago while Boji was very little. So now that the cost is clear, Healing goes over to Dorche and uses her magic to heal him back to his original state. After this is done, Hegan comes out of nowhere and starts to slam the snake side to side. And just as he is about to finish the job, he suddenly goes unconscious before Boji and Kage come out behind him. Once he is reunited with his mother, he immediately drags her to the snake and urges her to heal him. However, she's already used all his magic potions, so she doesn't have the strength to heal. Kage has already arranged for it, so he brings out a potion bottle, which Healing drinks so she can fully heal the snake. Just then, Hegan wakes up from his coma and attempts to smash Boji down with his hammer, but surprisingly, Boji can destroy it just by touching it with his sword, and after that, he makes the monster go unconscious by giving it another touch. Kage then ties the monster up and draws Boji's attention to Bebin's snake, who has now been fully healed. Then all of a sudden, Queen Healing acknowledges Kage's presence and asks him who is he and what is he doing here, to which he replies saying that he is Boji's friend. The Queen hears this and doesn't believe him, mainly because he senses an evil aura from him. But despite that, she still urges him to pledge his loyalty to Boji in the sense that he would risk his life to protect him. Kage finds this absurd, so he calls her a dumbass and tells her that he's not doing that. Bebin's snake then explains that Kage has been the one who has protected and led Boji down the right path this entire time. The Queen now understands this, so she goes down on one knee while apologizing to him for the misunderstanding. Kage turns around and sees that Boji is sad about the lions who have been injured, so before he knows it, his mother comes over to heal him. The lions are now healed and don't seem to be hostile anymore, but rather choose to remain loyal to Boji. The same goes for Gigan, who bows before him after acknowledging his power. After this, the Queen urges Boji to act and behave with a royal aura so he would be able to properly demand the respect that he deserves. Back at the civilian area, Oken is just about rounding out with the soldiers until he gets struck with some holy lightning, which causes him to get knocked out. This lightning appears to have been orchestrated by Prince Despa, who is seen to be hiding in the alleyway. Following this, Boji decides to go back to the underworld so that he can return the lion beasts to their home, and also so that he can stop Domus from destroying the underworld as a direct order given to him by King Boss. On reaching the gates of the underworld, Domus is blocked by the entire order of the underworld army. Surprisingly, they ignore Domus entirely and walk past him because they are ordered to get to the kingdom first and then await further instructions. With Hokuro hiding in the shadows with a crossbow, Domus steps up in front of them, indicating that he wants to try and defeat them all. It's very obvious that he has been outnumbered, so he moves up to an elevated surface, so they would only be able to attack him 3 at a time. The first 3 step up and Domus is easily able to defeat them, which makes the commander understand that he is quite powerful. After this, the strongest member of the squad, known as Tsubukade, steps up and is very confident that he can defeat Domus single-handedly. Domus is quite impressed at how Tsubukade is swinging his giant sword around so easily, and that alone makes him realize that he is going to be way tougher than the others. Shockingly, Domus easily parries his attack and lands a strong blow, causing Tsubukade to fall off the elevated surface. However, he gets up and recovers almost immediately. At this point, the commander is impressed with Domus' strength, so he decides to send in the entire army to attack him at once. As expected, Domus starts to struggle and doesn't find this task to be as easy. During this time, Hokuro observes this and starts to wonder whether he should offer some help, but Domus tells him to stay put. Fortunately, he is eventually able to defeat all the soldiers, causing Hokuro to give off a loud celebration that allows him to get caught with a knife put to his throat. Just then, King Desha arrives and mentions that he hopes to have a one-on-one battle with King Boss. Domus hears this and starts to wonder just how strong he must be to think that he can defeat King Boss. So to move things forward, Desha carries this huge weapon and uses it to strike Domus weakly, and follows it up with a hard kick to the groin, which makes Domus fall to his knees and start to cry. Just then, Yigan jumps down with Boji and Kage, which diverts Desha's attention from Domus. At that moment, Domus sees that Boji is still alive, and he immediately breaks down into tears because he knows that he has betrayed him. Boji, on the other hand, starts to throw a fit because he now has strong feelings of resentment and hatred toward Domus for betraying him, but Kage urges him to calm down. Desha gets quite bored of this, so he sends a lightning bolt at Gigan, causing him to go unconscious. After this, he goes on to let them all know that he plans to make Miranjo pay for all the evil she is doing. Now back at the civilization area, Oken has suddenly woken up and breaks free from his ropes, which leaves Despa in disbelief because he doesn't have anything left up his sleeve. To make things clearer, we flash back to find out about the king of the underworld known as Satun, who was one of the gods meant to go extinct. Because of this, he had immersed himself in researching immortality and had taken the lives of many of his people. As time went on, he discovered that there was a clue to immortality, being the fact that other giants often bore children to extend their life periods. So for Satun to do the same, he got himself a wife and ended up bearing 3 children. The oldest was named Desha, who inherited his father's superhuman powers. The second child was Despa, who didn't obtain any powers whatsoever, and finally, the third child was named Oken. In time, the evil god Satun was able to be defeated by his 3 sons, but then about when Oken turned 25 years old, the power of immortality arose within him. With that, it didn't take long before Oken turned evil, so Desha had no choice but to lock him up in the prison of the underworld. Then one day, while he is eating a rat, Miranjo appears in his room and breaks him out. Back to the present day, Oken has now gained consciousness, so he picks his sword up and doesn't attack Despa, but rather rushes back to the castle. Boji and Kage simultaneously arrive at the castle and see Apis lying unconscious on the floor. Since they don't know that he is helping Miranjo, they help him up and begin to inquire about his condition. Apis explains everything about King Boss coming back to life to them, after which he tells them both to leave the castle immediately because he doesn't think it is safe. But immediately after that, Apis senses Boji's new aura and can tell that he's gotten a lot stronger, so he advises him to go down whichever path he believes in. Meanwhile, Domas and Hokuro have finally arrived at the gateway to the underworld, so they fulfill their promise to King Boss by burning it down and then hurry back to assist Prince Boji. During this time, the criminal Zaku has taken Miranjo hostage with Red and Black beside him while he threatens to harm her. Just then, Oken appears out of nowhere and appears to be under Miranjo's control, so she orders him to attack him, but criminals Red and Black are there to defend while Zaku runs away. Boji manages to stop him. Zaku can sense just how powerful Boji is, so he starts to beg him not to harm him. This provides him with the perfect opportunity to hit Boji with a sneak attack by spraying him with some poisonous gas. However, this poison doesn't seem to have any effect on him since he is the child of giants. So with that, Boji can defeat Zaku and goes on to tie him up. Just then, Oken appears out of nowhere and issues a challenge to Boji. However, this is exactly what Despa has been trying to prevent because he believes that Boji will never be able to defeat Oken, and may even end up getting himself killed. The battle begins, and although Boji can block and destroy his attacks, he is unable to land any offensive attack because Oken is immortal. Miranjo can see this, so she unexpectedly helps Boji by telling Kage that Boji has no hope of beating Oken and would be better if he retreated. Kage hears this and immediately communicates this to Boji, who doesn't waste time climbing the wall and getting the hell out of there. Now that Boji is gone, Oken focuses his attention on Zaku and attempts to kill him, but Boji then appears in front of Zaku to protect him. Queen Healing and the others arrive at the grass field, where they see Apis lying helplessly on the floor. Apis can sense that his end is near, so he starts to cry while he tells Dorshe to do his best to protect Boji because he is the last hope that the entire kingdom has. The queen isn't about to watch him die on her, so she immediately uses her magic to heal him, after which she orders him and the others to go and assist Boji. Meanwhile, in the dungeons, King Boss sits in a meditation pose while he narrates the story of how he met Miranjo to Bebin. The Homa Kingdom was a place where people could learn how to use the same magic that gods used. At the time, the gods ruled one country after another, enslaving them. Miranjo's father was an outstanding wizard, and one day he and King Boss fought each other to the death, and he ended up killing him. King Boss himself had been wounded very badly, but Miranjo's mother had used her magic to save him. Because of this, the king became indebted to her and even decided to stay in the village to watch Miranjo grow up. Over time, the fighting with the gods intensified and he ended up fighting alongside them. Because of him, the Homa Kingdom had a series of victories, but he knew that if they were to lose just once, they would fall for good. Over time, the Homa Kingdom decided to join forces with the Gyakuza Kingdom, which is where she and Miranjo are now relocated to live. Over the years, the Gyakuza Kingdom started to advance and then ended up betraying the Homa Kingdom because they considered all the kindness and hospitality they showed to be a sign of weakness. Then one day, Miranjo's mother is visited by a group of Homans who come into her house to stab her and loot all of her properties, which ends up leaving Miranjo in the hands of the evil people of Homa. Now back to the present, Boji is having a hard time defeating Oken, and just before he gets killed, Despa arrives and throws in a lightning rod, which is supposed to draw the lightning to strike Oken. But surprisingly, Oken can dodge it. The lightning is then struck a second time and manages to connect with Oken's body, but he conducts the charge away from his heart, so it has no effect on him. At this point, Despa has no other tricks up his sleeve, so he already considers himself to be a gunner. So with Despa out of the game, Boji picks up his sword and starts to attack, but as expected, he isn't strong enough to overcome him. Just as Boji is a few seconds from death, Kage unlocks his secret ability and uses his wide body area to wrap Oken. Miranjo sees what Kage has done and considers it to be a rather stupid move because Oken is easily able to stab his way out of Kage's body. So with no further obstructions, Oken goes over to Boji and stabs him right in the chest. And after this happens, everyone remains in utter disbelief. For some reason, Miranjo decides to help out, so she possesses one of the corpses and uses her magic to start the healing process on Kage. Boji and Despa are now transported to a random icy tundra, which they first assumed to be heaven, but later look down to see Kage calling out to his late mother. Kage and his mother are separated by a little river, and it is revealed that Kage won't be able to come back to life if he crosses fully over. So because of this, Despa and Boji try to get his attention by screaming his name to the top of their lungs, but their efforts all seem to be in vain. As Kage's mother continues to call to him, Kage suddenly remembers all he has been through with Boji, after which Miranjo appears behind him and informs him that he will not be able to come back to life if he crosses the river. Kage realizes that he has to stick back and help Boji. He then tells his mother that he still has some unfinished business, after which his boat is pulled back by Miranjo. This good deed done by Miranjo causes the little version of her stuck with Daida to regain her face and limbs, after which she fades away, leaving Daida even more frustrated than before because he is now all alone. Back in the real world, Mitsumata attempts to battle Oken, but he isn't a match for him. So right before he gets killed, Bebin appears and slices straight through Oken's body. Seeing that he is immortal, Oken's body quickly reattaches itself, after which Bebin realizes that the best course of action would be to imprison him since he can't be killed. Hokuro picks Boji up and calls for the queen so that she can heal him, but unfortunately, she doesn't have any power left to heal. However, Bebin does mention that he knows someone who will be able to heal Boji, but first of all, they would need to take care of Oken. So with that being said, the four of them work together and start to beat Oken. Things look to be going in their favor for a little while, but start to go down when Oken uses his magic to freeze them in place, causing them to fall to their knees. Luckily for them, Apetus is there to snap them out of it, so with that, they are now ready for round 2 to commence. Back in this icy tundra, Miranjo is now face to face with Boji's biological mom, who she had killed in the war a long time ago. During her conversation, it is revealed that right before she died in the war back then, she had made a deal with the demon to give her a second chance at life. The demon grants the wish but gives the condition that she will remain trapped in a mirror during this time and also that he will consume her soul when she is to die again. Boji's mom tries to talk her out of all the evil she is doing. She even goes as far as to let her know that she doesn't have any grudges even though she was the one that killed her. Miranjo's mother is also present, so she does her best to advise her to stop this evil before it gets to a point she cannot control. However, Miranjo doesn't listen to them and still believes in her vision of being happy with King Boss forever. So after this, her fluster of emotions causes her and the others to return to the land of the living. Back there, although Boji and Despa come back to life, Oken has stabbed them, so they all lie on the floor in a pool of blood. However, Miranjo had healed Kage a little while back, so he is their last hope. Despa then informs him that the captain is the only one left with healing capabilities. Unfortunately, Oken beats him to it and stabs the captain, which would make him incapable of healing them. Just as all hope seems to be lost, King Boss appears out of the blue, which draws Oken's attention away from Kage. At first, the king uses his giant baton to attack them all, even with their injured bodies, but later unexpectedly uses the magic, inherited from Queen Healing, to heal them all at once. This healing process seems to have taken a huge toll on the king, causing him to be only able to use less than half of his true power. But even with that, King Boss is easily able to smash Oken repeatedly into the ground. However, he keeps on reforming his body, so King Boss decides to smash him up one more time and squeeze him into a tiny metal ball, after which he traps him in a giant boulder where he will be sealed forever. King Boss then looks back at them all with a menacing look, which implies that he is not on their side. Surprisingly, Boss doesn't attack them right away, but rather carries his giant club and walks past them to meet up with Miranjo. Boss goes down on a knee and lets her know that he had only come out because he heard her voice of suffering. Then after the little conversation they share, Boss finally lets Miranjo know that he is going to rid her of the pain and suffering that she has always experienced by creating a kingdom that they both will leave peacefully. After this has been said, he walks back to the battlefield with his wooden club in hand. Boss stands at a distance and swings his club at them all while giving them the choice of either swearing their allegiance to him or dying by his hand. Boji hears this and starts to have flashbacks because he cannot believe that his own father is willing to kill him. Without any hesitation, Boji decides to battle King Boss to his last breath. After this, Kage steps up to join him and the rest of them follow to support him. But before any of them can begin their attack, Despa draws their attention and tells that they will just end up dying for nothing because Boji is the only one who stands a chance of defeating King Boss. But even with this being said, Domus still feels guilty about betraying Boji, so he still picks up his sword and runs towards Boss with murderous intent. It's obvious to Despa that Domus will only get himself killed, so he signals Boji, who uses his swordsmanship to stun Domus, causing him to fall to the floor. Boji then walks past him and the battle between him and his father begins. Before his father lands his first strike, Boji starts to view Boss in the realm of the Absolute, where he has returned to his giant self and Boji remains with his little stature. Shockingly, he can dodge all of Boss's heavy attacks while gradually causing damage to the club itself. This goes on for a while until Boji defeats Boss by destroying his weapon. Everyone observes this and starts to tear up because they are so proud of how Boji has grown. So after this victory, Boji's swordsmanship is acknowledged to be the swordsmanship of a king. Before Boss dies, he uses the last bit of his strength to crawl over to Miranjo to try to kill her. But Boji arrives just in time and manages to stop him. However, even though Boji has just saved Miranjo's life, she still asks Boji to kill her and also reveals that killing her would return Dalida to his body safely. So on hearing this, Boji uses his sword to crack Miranjo's mirror, causing both her and King Boss's soul to start to fly off into heaven. Just then, the demon appears and is here to consume Miranjo's soul, as they both agreed upon. On seeing this demon, the captain tries to kill it, but he isn't able to reach it, so the demon goes on to consume Miranjo's soul, while King Boss floats up to heaven. Miranjo has now been devoured by the demon, so she finds herself in a red abandoned wasteland, where she sees a demon repeatedly chewing on their souls. This area where she finds herself is known to be the land of endless pain and suffering. Now before Dalida is freed from the dark abyss, Boss wishes to show him some of the memories he had with Miranjo. These memories being showcased reveal that King Boss's invincible strength didn't come naturally, but it was rather a wish granted to him by the demon, with the consequence that his next-born child would be an absolute weakling. Dalida sees this and now understands that this is why Boji was initially so tiny and weak. As Dalida continues to watch these memories, he also understands that Miranjo was constantly subjected to undeserved suffering her entire life. So because of this, Dalida makes a promise to his father that he's going to bring Miranjo back to life. Now back in the real world, the captain has been able to behead the demon, so Despa figures that he can now get the demon to grant his wish to remove the curse of immortality from Oken. But right before he can make this wish, Dalida wakes up and steals Despa's wish by asking the demon to bring Miranjo back to life. Once this wish is made, Miranjo is teleported out from that red wasteland and back into the land of the living. As expected, both Despa and the captain are upset that Dalida has stolen their wish because this was the only chance they had to save Oken. Meanwhile, being in the darkness, Dalida took a liking to Miranjo even though she was the one behind all of this, so he walks up to her while boldly saying that he wants her to be his wife. Since the wish has already been used, Despa walks over to Miranjo and tells her that she must pass on the details of why she committed these crimes to the next generation, so that this kind of thing never repeats itself. Despa fears how his brother may react to this, but when he communicates what's happened to Desha, he surprisingly just forgives them for it, and tells him to get some gold and silver as compensation. At the same time, while receiving the news, Desha is being awarded with the first place ranking of kings now that King Boss is dead. Back at the castle, Dalida humbly apologizes for placing them all in this situation because of his stupidity. Because of this blunder on his part, he doesn't feel that he is fit to be king anymore, so he decides to relinquish the throne to Boji. However, even though this is what Boji has always wanted, he hears this and starts to get nervous because he doesn't think he's ready to become a king. Kage can see that what's troubling Boji is just a simple case of low self-esteem, so he goes on to reassure him that he's going to be a great king. Dalida then kneels before Boji and assigns him the title of king, so after that, they all celebrate his new title by throwing him up into the air. After he is named king, Kage starts to feel that Boji won't need him anymore, so he decides to leave by his own choice. A couple of days go by with Boji ruling the kingdom, and he starts to notice that Kage is nowhere to be found. He starts to search for him and even alerts some of the guards to be on the lookout for him. But it's all to no avail. Kage had already left the kingdom in hopes of starting a new honest lifestyle, however, things don't seem to be looking up for him, especially since everyone in this new kingdom despises him because he is a member of the Shadow Clan. Then one day, Boji has been able to track down Kage in an empty grass field along the ends. Kage is surprised to see him because he expects him to be busy with other kingly duties. However, Boji goes on to inform Kage that he has relinquished the throne back to Dalida because he wants to build his own kingdom with Kage's help. So with that, Boji and Kage run off into the sunset as they begin their journey of creating their kingdom.